All right. All right, it's 2:01, so we'll go ahead and get things started. Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to welcome you to our webinar for export compliance featuring David Noah, who is the president of Shipping Solutions. My name is Jonathan Bricker, and I'm the chairman of the Arkansas District Export Council. In my primary role, I work for Regions Bank located in Bentonville, Arkansas. My banking career started off as international business development, and now I'm a commercial lender with a focus on helping commercial and industrial businesses located in Arkansas. I want to begin today by thanking our sponsors. We have got a great partnership with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, as well as Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions. With their support, they allow us to provide these webinars free of charge. So thank you to the AEDC and AMS. I really appreciate you all joining us today. For those that aren't quite sure who the DEC is and what we do, allow me to do a quick introduction. We're a private, nonprofit organization that brings together experienced international business people with potential exporters. Each DEC member has been appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce for their real-world expertise in international trade. We have a ton of experience within our council in many different sectors. But having said that, doesn't mean that we know all the answers to all the questions. But what we can do is introduce you to someone that does. We are a community of connections within the exporting world. My hope for the day is that you walk away from this webinar with more confidence in your exporting abilities. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, I invite you to reach out to us on our website, exportarkansas.org. and we'll have one of our members reach out to you. We want to be your strategic partner to help you grow your exports, which help you grow your bottom line. I'm a firm believer in that you can't start planning too soon. So I want to bring to your attention and invite you all to join us for the 14th Annual Governor's Award for Excellence in Global Trade, which we are hosting Thursday, October 3rd. The luncheon starts with a networking reception for the Arkansas business community, and it'll be located at Robinson Hall in downtown Little Rock. This award recognizes the exporting success among Arkansas's manufacturers and agricultural companies actively trading in international markets. We present each winning company with a trophy and certificate during the award ceremony. The companies are then profiled throughout the year as the winners of the Governor's Award on our website and throughout social media. I hope you'll join us in person, or if you want to learn more about how to apply for the award, please visit with us after the webinar. We typically have these meetings open for everyone to participate, but we had so many people register that in order to accommodate everyone, we had to hold it in a webinar format. So I hope that doesn't deter you from asking your questions in the chat or the Q&A section. Now, I'd like to introduce everyone to your moderator this afternoon, Mr. Rudy Ortiz. Rudy is the previous chairman of the RDEC and owner of Strategic Business Services, LLC, where he helps companies in a wide variety of international business and exporting needs. Rudy is also a partner with Global Market Entry Consultants, which is a global team of elite international business consultants working together to assist companies to initiate and expand international business activities in other countries. In addition, he has degrees and certifications in international business. For these reasons, he is the DEC's Education Chair. Rudy, I really appreciate you for spearheading all of this. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So as it turns out, today the class that we're going to have, of course, has to do with regulatory compliance and the documentation that's necessary to be able to ship something from one point to the other and make sure that it gets there without any problems. And the person that we're having to speak to us about this is an expert, David Noah, president of Shipping Solutions, which is a software company that develops and sells export documentation and compliance software, which is targeted at small and medium-sized U.S. companies. David's a frequent speaker and writer on export regulations and compliance issues, and also has this blog called Passages, the International Trade blog, a wonderful tool where you can get lots and lots of great information. Now, we're hoping that some of the things that you'll learn as a consequence of attending this webinar is that you'll learn kind of better ways to mitigate risk in foreign trade. You'll learn about the 11 most common documents that are required for export shipment and where they are used in export processes. That information typically appears on various export forms, and is why it's needed. A brief explanation of the electronic export information, otherwise known as EEI, that is often filed through the AESDirect on the ACE portal. In addition, an introduction to some important export-related terms related to properly completing the export forms documents, including HTS and Schedule B codes, Incoterms 2020, the Destination Control Statement, and routed export transactions. So we're hoping that you're going to learn a lot of things that are going to keep you out of trouble. I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that the government has no humor. They really do not have a sense of humor, and in some cases, depending on just how badly you mess up, some of the fines can be grievous. And so we want to make sure that you stay out of trouble by understanding what documents are required, how to fill them out properly, and the requirements in terms of how long you should keep all this documentation and communications to keep you out of trouble should a audit or some sort of inquiry occur. And with David, I think I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Heidi, for inviting me and having me here today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slides up on your screens now. You see those, Rudy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. Compliance issues, regulatory issues are very important, obviously, and a lot of that is handled through your documentation. Good documentation, obviously, is not only important for complying with the government regulations, but if you want to ensure that your goods arrive at the right place at the appropriate time, and that you get paid for your export, documentation is important there too. So there's a lot of reason to make sure you're familiar with the export documentation requirements and the different export documents, and I hope to cover the basics of those today. So let's get started to talk about export documents. As you can see from this slide, there's many different types of documents that may be required depending on what you're shipping, how you're shipping it, and where it's going. But in a typical export exchange, it starts when you receive an inquiry about one or more of your products. Now, that inquiry might include a request for a quote. And so if it comes from a domestic prospect, you probably have a quote, a standard quotation form that you use. But in an international transaction, your quote would typically be provided in the form of a pro forma invoice. That's because your international prospect may need a pro forma invoice to arrange for proper financing, to open a letter of credit, to apply for an import license, and to determine what else they need to import your goods and make sure that you get paid, which, as we know, is important. As you can see, a pro forma invoice looks a lot like a commercial invoice. And if you do it correctly, they will be very similar indeed. A pro forma invoice specifies who is the buyer and the seller in the transaction, and includes a detailed description of the goods, the harmonized system classification of those goods, the price, the term of the sale, which would typically be would be expressed as one of the 11 current Incoterms, the payment terms that you've agreed upon, the delivery details, including how and where the goods will be delivered and how much that will cost, and the currency to be used in the quote, whether it's in US dollars, it could be in the currency of the country in which you're shipping the goods. It's also very important that you date your pro forma invoice and include an expiration date. If we've had no lessons from the last few years, other than we know things can be very volatile in the export process. Transportation can take way longer than you think. So it's important you minimize your risk by setting a very specific time frame for your quote. Now, there are a couple things I just want to mention that I want to talk about before I move on. The first is the harmonized system, or HS, classification of your goods. Now, I'm sure this isn't new information for you, but just as a reminder, the HS codes are defined by the World Customs Organization, and it's used by most countries of the world as the basis for classifying your goods for import and export. It's a 6-digit code that should be the same in the United States as it is in your buyer's country. And it's what is used by your buyer's customs authority to determine the duty rate of your goods. Keep in mind that and then in addition to that, then each country can add additional digits. In the United States, it's 4 more digits. So there is a 10-digit harmonized tariff schedule of the United States that's used for imports into the US, and the 10-digit Schedule B codes that is used for exports out of the US. Now, those first 6 digits should be the same in every country, and then those additional 4 digits can change per country. Now, keep in mind that the HS and the HTS codes can and do change. Every 5 years, the World Customs Organization releases a revised list of those HS codes, which they just did in 2022, and every country must adapt. Now, that doesn't mean that most HTS and Schedule B codes were changed in 2022, but if you're an exporter or an importer, you should make it a habit to review the harmonized tariff schedule each year to see if by chance your product codes need to be updated. An exporter needs to know their current 10-digit Schedule B code when they or their agent is ready to file through the automated export system. And I'll talk about AES, EEI filings, ACE, a little bit later, but you do need to know that 10-digit Schedule B code for your products so you can file through AES. But all you need to know right now is that a pro forma invoice should include the 6-digit harmonized system code for your products. And that's because you want to make sure since that document's going to be used in more than one country, you want to make sure you're using a 6-digit classification that should be the same in both countries. Now, I also mentioned that you should include the term of sale on your pro forma invoice. So for an international transaction, as Rudy mentioned, that term of sale is typically expressed as one of the 11 Incoterms agreed upon by the International Chamber of Commerce. And those Incoterms define who is responsible for the various steps in the import-export process. This chart of Incoterms 2020 Chart of Responsibilities and Transfer of Risk summarizes what functions the seller and the buyer, or the exporter and the importer, is responsible for under each of the terms. Now, using Incoterms is more complicated than can be summarized in this chart, but I think this chart provides a good overview and a good reminder of the responsibilities under each of those terms. And if you think this chart could be helpful to you, you can download it free from the shippingsolutions.com website. So once you've set...
David, my apologies for interrupting. I wanted to make something maybe not to put too much of a fine point on it, but when we talk about responsibilities, what we're really talking about is liabilities. In other words, at what point does your personal liability for one thing or the other pertaining to the to the shipment start and end. And so it's more than just responsibilities. It's important to understand that you are liable for X, Y, and Z, and that Incoterms sets those out.
Very good point. And it's also interesting to know that that transfer of risk and the transfer of responsibility can be at different points of the process. So it's really important that you pay attention to what those Incoterms are stating, and that you make sure you understand what they are as you negotiate the sale with your buyer. So thank you, Rudy. So as I mentioned, so once you've sent your pro forma invoice to your international prospect and you've received their order, you need to start preparing your goods for shipping, including the paperwork that should accompany those goods. Of those documents, the commercial invoice is one of the most important. It includes most of the details of the entire export transaction from start to finish. Now, I sometimes get questions from people who look at this sample commercial invoice and wonder why it looks so different from the invoices their company uses for their domestic orders. So keep in mind that the invoice you create from your company's accounting or ERP systems are accounting invoices that are used to get paid. This invoice, on the other hand, is used for export purposes. So as I mentioned just a little bit ago, you need this commercial invoice. It should, if it's done right, it should look a lot like the pro forma invoice that you initially sent to your customer to serve as a quote. So although now you might have more details, or you will have more details that you didn't know before. So for example, you probably now have an order number or purchase order number that you and your customer have generated, as well as some other customer reference number. You may have additional banking and payment information, and you should make sure to include any relevant insurance information and include any other details that will ensure the prompt delivery of your goods and full payment from your customer. So the additional information will be added to this invoice. The invoice should also help you stay compliant with U.S. export regulations. If any of the goods in your shipment require an export license or are eligible for an export license exemption, you are required by law to include the destination control statement. Now, this statement is intended to ensure that your buyer understands that the goods in this shipment are intended for the country listed on the invoice, and they shouldn't be diverted to another country. Although you only need to include this statement on the commercial invoice for those items that are controlled under the Export Administration Regulations, or EAR, or the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or ITAR, I actually recommend that you include the statement on all of your export invoices. In fact, I know a lot of companies that include this statement on all their invoices, domestic and international. For example, if you order a new laptop from Dell Computer, their invoice, at least the last one I saw, includes this destination control statement regardless of where you reside. If your goods somehow end up in Iran, for example, having included a destination control statement on your commercial invoice is another form of proof that your company is doing its due diligence to stay compliant with U.S. export regulations. And the importance of being able to demonstrate that you're doing your due diligence is very important.
And David, if I might add to that, the last document, once in a while, what you will see, kind of depending on the nature of the product that you're selling, is that suddenly during this whole process, the person who's trying to buy your product will change the location. They may initially tell you that it's going to one country, and then right before the shipment actually is starting to get processed, they will say, no, it's going to someplace completely different. That should be a red flag for you on a couple of different levels, both financial and in terms of some sort of shenanigans with foreign powers and whatnot. So, once again, the government expects that if you see something like this, you should be asking yourself and them, why? Why this sudden change? It should be a real red flag for you.
Yeah, and red flags are definitely something you shouldn't ignore. The requirements specifically say you shouldn't self-blind so that you don't tell me about it. And of course, there's everything you should do prior to the shipment as well, such as screening your customers against the different government denied party lists as well. So that's also very important. Now, some countries may require other country-specific invoices for their exports. So, for example, if you're doing a shipment to Canada, Canada Customs may require a Canada Customs invoice if the import is valued at more than $2,500 Canadian, unless the commercial invoice has all the additional data elements that you'll find on a Canada Customs invoice. In addition, if your buyer resides in one of the 15 Caribbean community countries, they may request that you include a CARICOM invoice with your shipment as well. So be aware that there may be other types of the invoice that you may need to provide. Now, the next document then is a packing list. An export packing list may be more detailed than a packing list or a packing slip that you provide for your domestic shipments. Your freight forwarder may or will use the information on the packing list to create the bills of lading for your shipment. A bank may require that a detailed packing list be included in the set of documents that you must present to get paid under a letter of credit. And customs authorities in the US and in the destination country may use the packing list to identify where certain items are packed that they want to examine. I'd much rather have them know exactly which package or container or pallet a particular product resides on, rather than having them to open up everything to find what they're looking for. So a packing list will help in that regard as well. The packing list identifies the elements or the items in the shipment by package and should include the net and gross weight and the dimensions of the package in both US imperial and metric measurements. It should identify any markings that appear on the packages and any special instructions that you want to include to ensure the safe delivery of the goods to their final destination.
David, there's a couple of questions, and I think we should probably cover these particular ones now. Angela McGehee asked, is there a threshold of value that changes either the process or the steps?
Well, that's a more complicated question than it seems on its face. Yes, there can be. The value of the goods, if they're less than $2,500 per Schedule B code, that will often eliminate the need to do the EEI filing through AES. There may be some de minimis entry requirements, as small products for entering into a certain country. It may be easier to get the goods or faster if they're low value items, depending on how they're being transported, if they're being hand carried, for example. So yes, it can make a difference, but at the same time, for compliance issues, it may not make a difference. So the role of the government in terms of setting export controls, requiring export licenses, is to prevent items that could provide harm to our country or the citizens of our country, and therefore they don't want those specific products to end up in the hands of people they shouldn't end up in, and that's regardless of the value of those goods. So yes, sometimes, no, sometimes.
Right. The next question is the destination control statement required when exporting on-prem software and technical data?
So that would be called a deemed export. So you can be an exporter even if you are not actually shipping a good out of the country. So for example, if you have a manufacturing process where you create items that are controlled, that do require a license, either under the EAR or the ITAR, and you have someone from a country that would otherwise not be able to ship that finished good without them getting a license, having them coming and looking on site at how you're manufacturing that item That's considered to be a deemed export, and the licensing requirements would be the same. If you are transmitting software that's controlled, that has a certain level of encryption, that would be could still be controlled, even if it's not a physical item. If you're transmitting blueprints or other technical data over the internet, or if people still use fax machines, by a fax machine, and it's controlled, if it was the final product, that is also controlled. So those items would still be controlled. Those items would still have requirements, and the destination control statement, you know, I don't know how you would necessarily do that if it's you have a visitor on site. I would probably ask them to perhaps sign an end user agreement as when they came and visited. I'm not sure. I do know that the items would still be controlled. I'm not necessarily familiar with how you would do that. That's a good question for BIS.
And one of the things that I might just kind of insert here, just from other things that I'm aware of, for instance, some university students that you know, foreign students are not allowed to see certain information that is being developed by the university, because in essence, were they to look at it, read it, then they could export, quote unquote, export that intellectual property at the end of the day. And so that's one of the ways that the university gets around, or I should say, you know, prevents a problem by actually just not allowing foreign students of certain countries to even be able to see the information. So at the end of the day, yeah, a certain software information, certain technical data is intellectual property, and that can be an export, could be considered an export, and so all those things normally apply.
Yeah, there have been, if you aren't familiar with BIS publication, don't let this happen to you. They publish this fairly thick guide of real world examples of individuals and organizations that have gotten in trouble for their exports. And there are definitely some examples of universities that have gotten in trouble for doing precisely that. Okay. Other questions right now, or should I keep?
That's it for right now, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so now that some countries in like China and certain Middle Eastern countries require a certificate of origin for a shipment that identifies in what country the goods have originated. These usually need to be signed by some semi-official organization like a chamber of commerce or a country's consulate office. And it may be required even if you've included the country of origin information on your commercial invoice. Usually a chamber of commerce will charge you a fee to stamp and sign your certificate, or require you to be a member. And in that case, they may give you a discount or provide it free of charge. But you'll need to deliver a completed form to the chamber office where they will stamp and sign it. Now, I used to hear examples where a chamber would provide a member who requested a whole stack of certificates of origin that have already been signed and stamped by the chamber. I haven't heard that for a while, but certainly that is skirting the intention of a certificate of origin. And I know there have been certain chambers that have lost their ability to provide certificates of origin because they've done that. So make sure that you've got a completed shipment, an actual shipment, completed documentation before you go to your chamber and get it stamped. Now, one of the things that has happened in the past few years, and I think it's accelerated by COVID, is the use of an electronic certificate of origin. So it used to be where you have to print out a certificate of origin, drive to the chamber office, wait your turn in line, have them review it, and then they'll stamp it, and then you can drive back, and then you've got your signed and stamped certificate. Now, more and more companies, certainly more and more of the companies that we talk with, use an electronic ECO or electronic certificate of origin, or an ECO, we abbreviate it. And it allows you to apply for that certified or chamberized certificate of origin online. And then you can receive that certificate electronically, or if you prefer an embossed seal on your certificate, you can get it overnighted to you by courier. And so more and more companies are doing that to eliminate the hassles of going to a chamber office. We have the ability to work with the chamber to provide those electronic certificates of origin. If you're interested, you can go to our website to see more information about that. In addition to the generic certificate of origin that's stamped by a chamber, there's also country-specific certificates of origin. The United States currently has signed 14 free trade agreements with 20 different countries in which goods are eligible for reduced or zero duty rates when imported into those countries. You'll find a list of those free trade agreements on this slide. Some of the free trade agreements, such as the USMCA or US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and CAFTA, or the Central American Free Trade Agreement, include more than just one country besides the US. That's how come there's 14 of them but 20 countries. To be eligible for these reduced tariff rates, it's important, or in most cases, the importer must be able to verify that the goods they are importing qualify under their specific free trade agreement. It's a whole day discussion or longer to go through the rules of origin and preference criteria that you need to use under the different free trade agreements to have your goods qualify. But I can summarize it in the 3 different ways that they may be eligible. Number 1, they may be wholly grown or produced in the US. So that may be rice grown in Arkansas or hogs raised in Minnesota. Number 2, it's the goods are substantially transformed in the United States. Or number 3, the value of the non-originating part of a good is less than a specific percentage of the total value of the goods. Now, this is a very simplified explanation of how goods qualify under a free trade agreement, but I hope you get the point. It's important that you know how the goods qualify under a specific free trade agreement. You can't say they qualify just because they are being shipped from the United States. They're more complicated than that. And an importer must be able to prove the claim that they are qualify under the different free trade agreement. So how can they do that if they haven't produced the goods? Well, they rely on the exporter or the producer of the goods to provide a certificate of origin that indicates how they qualify and that is signed that it does qualify. Now, once NAFTA went away, there's no longer a free trade agreement that has a specific certificate of origin that you must use, but there is certain data elements that are required to appear to verify that the goods qualify. You can add that information on company letterhead and provide that. But that being said, I think most companies still prefer using a certificate, a specified certificate of origin form based on templates that's provided by the United States International Trade Administration and in the country where the goods are being imported. Most of those look very similar to what the USMCA certification of origin look like. And by using a pre-printed form or a pre-designed form, you can be ensured that you have the data that's required in order to be able to have customs recognize that the goods do in fact qualify under the appropriate free trade agreement.
David, Lori Shu is asking, does the listing of FTAs only pertain to exports? Are there others for imports into the U.S.?
No, they would be this. It's the same for importing in the U.S. Since we're talking about exports in this webinar, I'm focused on the export side. But yes, the same. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement are requirements are the same for leaving the United States as they are into entering the United States. Same with CAFTA, same with Chile, same with Panama. So yes, they can be used both for imports and exports. Yes, good
Thank
question.
you.
Okay. So this is, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement replaced NAFTA on July 1st, 2020. So now it's been in effect for nearly 4 years and it's fully implemented. Again, there's a lot you could talk about. You could do a whole day webinar talking about specifics of the USMCA. But what I really want to emphasize is that an exporter or an importer should not sign the certification of origin unless they know that it's accurate and the information is true and that the goods do in fact qualify. We get calls all the time. We want to know what needs to go in a certain field. And as we ask them questions, obviously they're just their customer just provided them with a copy of the form and asked them to sign it, and they have no idea what they're signing. So do not sign anything, just like you wouldn't sign your tax returns without making sure the information is correct. Don't sign a free trade agreement certificate of origin. You can face significant penalties if you were to get audited and can't, in fact, prove that your goods do qualify. So that also means that you need to make sure you keep track of how your goods qualify, so you're not scrambling in case you do get audited and you have to prove it once again how you came up with that.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, having some sort of, I guess, manual, for lack of a better word, in terms of your processes of how you came to those conclusions, why you believe this was correct or not, is going to be very useful in terms of showing the government documentation and also helping your employees, as you hire new ones, understand the processes for making those kinds of decisions. And once again, the penalties can be very onerous.
Yes, yes. So now the next document is a certificate of free sale. It's also sometimes called a certificate for export or a certificate to foreign governments. But a certificate of sale is evidence that your goods, such as food items, cosmetics, biologics, or medical devices, are legally sold or distributed in the open market without restriction, and they are approved, if necessary, by the regulatory authority in the United States. So for manufacturers and exporters of pharmaceuticals and some food products, the customs authority in the country of import may require a certificate of free sale from the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And in that case, you need to apply with them or with your state. For other types of products, they will accept a certificate of free sale issued by a chamber of commerce. So the first thing you should do if they request a certificate of free sale is to see if they require an FDA issued certificate. Otherwise, a chamber issued certificate is faster and cheaper to obtain. Unlike a certificate of origin, you don't need to provide a certificate of free sale for every shipment. Instead, you need to provide a certificate of free sale when you first try to send your products to a specific country. You're essentially informing the customs authority in that country, hey, here's a new thing I'm going to start importing in your country, and here's my support documents that confirm that I can legally sell this in my country, in the country of manufacture.
Yeah. David, you mentioned the Chamber of Commerce in terms of the certificate. I have also seen the state's Secretary of State issue these documents as well. So kind of be aware that that may be the source.
Yep, that's right. So typically, regardless of where the source is, who the source is, you need to get a certificate of free sale. You need to supply a declaration from the manufacturer, if you're not the manufacturer, on company letterhead that the goods are manufactured in the United States. You must submit copies of at least 2 invoices issued by your company within the last 12 months, showing that you've sold these products to 2 different U.S. customers. And again, we can help you with certificates of free sale as well if you're interested with that. So one of the most important partners an exporter will work with in your export process is a freight forwarder. A forwarder will usually arrange the transport of the goods with a carrier and help ensure that you've taken care of everything you need to be done for this process to go smoothly. Depending on the term of the sale you agreed to with the buyer, that's again one of those Incoterms we talked about, the freight forwarder may be hired and working for the exporter, or in the case of what's called a routed export transaction, they may be hired and working for the buyer. But regardless of who hired the forwarder, it's important that you provide them with the information they need to successfully move your goods. So the shipper's letter of instruction, or the SLI, is the document that is usually used to facilitate this communication. And the sample that we're looking at the screen is based on a template provided by the National Customs Broker and Forwarding Association of America. I often describe the SLI as sort of a cover memo that includes all that you include with all your other export paperwork to tell the forwarder what they need to know about the shipment. Now, depending on whether or not the forwarder works for you, the SLI may include a limited power of attorney, giving them authority to act on your behalf for the shipment. And that would include, if you wish to have them do so, the EEI filing through AES. And so that statement is important if you're going to have your agent file through AES on your behalf. They can't legally do it without, on our standard export transaction, written authorization from the exporter. On a routed export transaction where they're arranging the transportation of the goods, that written authorization must come from the importer, or the in foreign trade regulation terms, the foreign principal party in interest. Now, most exports valued at more than $2,500 per item must be submitted to customs via AES. Now, that's a very broad explanation of the AES filing requirements. There are lots of exceptions in there too, but the point here is that AES is an important part of that export process. As I mentioned, if you're hiring a freight forwarder, if the seller is hiring the freight forwarder to handle the shipment and they are acting as an agent for the buyer, they're the ones who typically do the AES filing. We just did a webinar earlier this year where we had a couple officials from the U.S. Census Bureau, which has authority over the foreign trade regulations, and they said that 3/4 of AES filings are done by agents, usually a freight forwarder. So oftentimes you will pay them to do that on your behalf. And if you do that, you are legally required to provide certain data elements that they can, so they have the information they need to do the filing. Now, I understand that most people don't do the AES filing themselves, that they pay a forwarder to do it on their behalf, but I would advocate that companies should do their own AES filings. And actually, the Census Bureau agrees. They've published blog posts as well where they think people should do their own AES filing. And even in a routed export transaction where the USP, or the foreign principal party of interest, or the buyer is hiring the forwarder, you can still negotiate with them to give you, as the seller, permission to do the AES filing. And the reason I suggest that you do it yourself is that, first of all, it's not that hard to do. You got to get signed up, get a username and password. That might be the hardest part of the process, but filling out that information, submitting that information once you're signed up, have an account, is not that hard. So something to consider. If you're relying on a forwarder or other agent to do it on your behalf, think about it. You are responsible for the accuracy of that information, regardless of who's doing the filing. You can outsource responsibility, but you can't outsource liability. And even if you don't, even if an agent does it wrong and they're liable for the misinformation, you're going to be dragged into that investigation if there is one, and that's spend a lot of time on something that you could be doing something more productive with. So at this point, I've talked about the 6 most common documents that an exporter will produce: the pro forma invoice, the commercial invoice, the packing list, a certificate of origin, the certificate of free sale, and a shipper's letter of instruction. But that's just for a typical shipment. There may be other documents you need depending on what, where, and how you're exporting the goods, and how little of the responsibility you want to take on. And so I'm going to touch on much more briefly some of those other documents. An inland bill of lading is often the first transportation document created for an export. It can be prepared by the inland carrier, or you can create it yourself. It's a contract of carriage between the shipper of the goods that states where the goods are going. It also serves as your receipt that the goods have been picked up. In an international shipment, the inland bill of lading is not typically consigned to the buyer. Instead, it is consigned to the carrier, who will be moving the goods internationally, or if not directly to the carrier, to a forwarder, a warehouse, or some other third party who will consign your goods to the carrier when ready. If you're shipping your goods by ocean vessel, you need an ocean bill of lading. An ocean bill of lading can serve both as a contract of carriage and a document of title for the cargo. A straight bill of lading is consigned to a specific consignee and is not negotiable. This consignee can take possession of the goods by presenting a signed original bill of lading to the carrier. A negotiable bill of lading is consigned to order, or to order of shipper, and is signed on the back by the shipper and sent to the bank in the buyer's country. The bank holds on to the original bill of lading until the requirements of a documentary collection or a letter of credit have been satisfied. Now, Minnesota-based Cargill used to be a client of mine, and they explained to me how frequently a single shipment of soybeans or some other commodity can be bought or sold during its journey across the ocean. And they used a negotiable bill of lading to help them manage that. If your goods are being shipped on a plane, then you need an airway bill. Unlike an ocean bill of lading, an airway bill is never negotiable. Instead, if it's a contract of carriage between the shipper and the carrier. If your products are considered dangerous dangerous goods by either the International Air Transport Association or the International Maritime Organization, you need to include the appropriate dangerous goods form with your shipment. Shipping dangerous goods or hazardous materials can be tricky, and before you do it, the appropriate people at your company need to be trained in the proper packaging, labeling, and documentation of these shipments. The document you see on the screen here with the red border is the IATA form, the shipper's declaration for dangerous goods, and is required for air shipments. There's a different version of the form. You'll often see it with blue borders, although those blue borders aren't actually legally required for your ocean shipments. Again, these forms should be completed by someone who has been specially trained for dangerous goods shipment. Now, during my discussion of the negotiable bill of lading, I mentioned documentary collections and letters of credit. What we're seeing here on the screen is a bank draft that may be used to collect payment for exports under those terms. It serves as a guarantee of payment to the recipient, typically the exporter, by the issuing bank. In a letter of credit arrangement, the importer's bank issues a letter of credit to the exporter, guaranteeing payment upon the presentation of specified documents and compliance with the terms and conditions of the credit. The letter of credit may specify the use of a bank draft as the method of payment, and the exporter is required to draft a document that instructs the paying bank to make payment to the exporter or a nominated party. This bank draft is then presented along with other required documents to the bank specified in the letter of credit. Under documentary collections, that involves the export shipping, or the documentary collections involve the exporter shipping the goods and presenting the shipping documents to the bank. The exporter's bank forwards these documents to the importer's bank with instructions for payment. Similar to a letter of credit, the exporter may use a bank draft as part of the documentary collection process. The bank draft becomes a payment order instructing the importer or the importer's bank to make payment to the exporter upon fulfillment of certain conditions. The bank draft may or may not include a transmittal letter, which we see here on the screen on the bottom 2/3 of the document, which includes details of the draft transaction, including the types of additional documents that are included and payment instructions. In both scenarios, whether through a letter of credit or a documentary collection, the use of a bank draft provides a level of assurance to the exporter. The bank draft serves as a payment guarantee backed by the issuing bank's commitment to honor the draft upon compliance with the specified terms and conditions. So I've tried to give you a basic understanding of the typical documents you might need to create for your export shipments. I often get asked by exporters, particularly new exporters or those companies that are looking to expand their export to new markets, how they know what documents they need to produce. And the answer to that is you should ask. If you're going to get this right, if you're going to make sure your goods clear customs at both borders, arrive in a timely manner, and that you get paid in full, you can't start thinking about paperwork only once the goods are ready to ship. When you're talking to a prospective customer in a foreign country, your discussion should include which export forms are required and who's going to prepare them, you or them. If you don't understand what they're looking for, ask. If what they're asking for doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to push back until you're satisfied. Talk to your freight forwarder and your bank to find out what other documents they say you need for your shipment. Your freight forwarder and your banker are your partners in this enterprise, and they should be forthcoming with advice and assistance. And if they're not helpful, find someone else to work with.
That's great advice.
Yeah. Once you've determined what documents you need, make sure you fill them out completely and accurately. It's important that your information is consistent across all your documents. Wrong address on a form could slow a shipment. A discrepancy in how you describe a product may cause problems at the bank. And accuracy includes honesty. So if they ask you to switch an HS classification or to reduce the value of an item on the form, you should say no. That could end up with big fines or even time in jail. So you don't want to do that. And the last thing I'd like to mention is people also ask about how long they need to keep their paperwork. The general guidance is for 5 years after the completion of the export shipment. And I'm not talking just about the export documents that you prepared, but also any correspondence, emails, notes from phone calls, etc., that are part of the export transaction. Again, the EAR, the ITAR require that you keep all this information so that if you get audited, they can take a look at it and make sure you're doing your due diligence and staying compliant. So, this is information that you'll find on our blog at Rudy mentioned Passages. That's a free blog we have. We've got hundreds of articles related to different aspects of importing and exporting. We've got free templates for these different forms on our website as well. You can download those for free. And please, if you have questions, if you want more information, don't hesitate to reach out to me, give me a call, or send me an email. And that's my presentation.
David, thank you so much, man. That was a great info. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure that having the right mindset and kind of understanding why the documentation needs to be kept for at least 5 years. Once again, the burden of proof is on you. It's not on the government. And so if you have a very thorough paper trail of all these documents and communications, whether they're emails or faxes or whatever they are, that shows a thread, so to speak, that explains why these decisions were made, what information you had to be able to make those decisions. It could very well be that at the end of the day, the government says, well, that was the wrong way to do it. But if it's clear that you were trying your best and that you have this paper trail, whatever fine or ruling they make is it's going to take into account the fact that you do have these documents that show that there was no malintent, that there was some misunderstanding, and that an error occurred, and the chances that that the problem is going to be a big one is really, really limited if you have these documents and these communications as well. So it's important that you get this right. Now, as it turns out, Dave, we have a couple of more questions. Let me see here. I want to go. Let me see. Actually, let me go back to one that Catherine had here, but I thought it was a particularly good one. So, so she asked. This was in terms of the certificates of free sale. She says, "Are they required for each shipment?" And I think what she's asking is, Company A is wanting to buy your product, uh, and they're going to continue buying that product from you. Do they need a CFS for every shipment or only for the first one?
Just the first one. Unlike a certificate of origin where you would need one for every shipment, a certificate of free sale you would typically just provide to their customs authority once, and then the goods are registered there, and you can ship them again without needing a certificate.
Okay. Let me see here. Alberto Torres, if you are not certain about anything, so if you're not certain about something, ask Rudy. I appreciate that. Let me see here. Where would we begin to start learning how this specifically applies to our business? State resources and the presenters, all of the above. The U.S. Department of Commerce is a great partner. The RDEC is the technical assistance arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce. You've got wonderful guys like David and all the different members of the DEC. The banks, as David stated a little while ago, the freight forwarders, all of these people are people that you ought to be depending on to provide you the different pieces from different angles, right, of information. And if they're not willing to do it, go to somebody else, right? There's plenty of other resources out there. But yeah, lots of great resources. I would suggest that that you start with the deck. If you have a question, send the question to either Jonathan or myself or Miss Heidi, and one of us will route it to the correct person. It could be that I can answer the question. It could be that we need to pull in somebody who has specialty knowledge on X. But in any case, starting with the deck certainly is a good resource, and then I can rely on guys like David for that specialty information. So yeah. Also, the U.S. Export Assistance Center, which is the U.S. Commercial Service, is another name for it. Let me see here.
Rudy, I saw a question pop up about routed export transaction. If you don't mind, if I could quickly just clarify what that is.
Sure thing.
If an exporter is hiring a freight forwarder to do a shipment, that is a standard export transaction. If you choose an Incoterm like XWorks or FCA, where the buyer or the foreign party is arranging the transportation of the goods out of the US and they're hiring the freight forwarder, that's considered to be a routed export transaction.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Let's see. This is question in the Q&A about software. Let me look at that. Any software you recommend for all this document? Yeah. Shipping Solutions, David Noah would be a great guy to start off with. But in all honesty, I mean, there are other companies as well, but David is, I think, one of the best guys to talk to, and I would definitely contact him and see if he can help you with whatever it is that you need. But there are other resources as well. I think the important thing to understand here is that there are software tools to make this whole process smoother, much less likely that you're going to make a significant mistake. Trying to just kind of have it all in your head and some documents or some papers is not a very good system. Having a software that guides you through the process, and you can set it up so that when you have this kind of a shipment or this kind of a purchase, it automatically brings up these kinds of documents so that you're not guessing as you learn the process. So software is really, really useful. Okay, so another question, does USPPI have a right to copy the AES transmission record for routed transmissions?
No. US and a routed export transaction, the US PPI, or which would typically be the exporter, has to provide, I believe there's 10 data elements they need to provide to the forwarder so that they can file accurate information, but they don't have a legal right to look at that. However, the ACE portal, the Automated Commercial Environment, where AES resides, you can run reports. So you can go in, and there are 3 different types of reports. And one of the reports is you can see all the filings that were done by a third party using your tax ID number. And I would recommend that's something you run regularly. We had a client of ours who did that and found out that their freight forwarder, who is no longer their freight forwarder, was using their tax ID for all export shipments, regardless of who, what company that was.
Oh
So
my.
it's just one of those things that it's important to stay on top of.
Very good. Now, Tammy Dunlop is asking a question, and I must be misunderstanding. The question is, where can I find the blank FTAs?
If you go to shippingsolutions.com, under resources, there are free export downloads, and you can go and download a template of all the different free trade agreement certificates of origin. So you can download that free from our website.
Ah, okay. Very good. Well, there you go. Let me see here. I think.
Or go to the ITA website, the International Trade Administration website. They have them there too.
Perfect. Nancy is asking, could we use a draft commercial invoice as a pro forma invoice?
And call it a draft commercial. As long as I would talk with the potential buyer of the goods and see if they are satisfied with that, as long as that allows them to do what they need to do on their end. I don't see why you couldn't, but that's why it's so important that you have communications right from the very beginning between the buyer and the seller, between the buyer, seller, forwarder, and banker. Don't wait till the last minute. That's when problems happen.
Yeah, and absolutely, and making sure that you ask the buyer, what do you need? Let them tell you what they need. Don't put yourself in a position where they assume that you know what they need. Yeah, that can really go south pretty quickly. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have. And David, once again, I want to thank you for the great information that you provided and answering all these questions. I'm hoping that people who have attended and will look at the webinar video later on will get a really good sense of some of the things they need to do to keep themselves out of trouble. At the end of the day, that's one of our chief goals here, is making sure that people don't have any serious problems because they've gotten access to the information and the resources they need to keep themselves out of trouble and therefore be profitable. So with that, I think we will. Jonathan, do you have anything that you want to comment on?
No, obviously a lot of great information, Mr. Noah. Thank you again for being here and lending us your expertise. Rudy, thank you for putting all this together and hosting today. Miss Heidi, couldn't have done all this without you. Thank you. And of course, again, to our sponsors, the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions. Thank you for partnering with us and trusting us for the educational webinars.
The one last thing is, as you can see, Ms. Heidi, could you go ahead and go back to the previous slide? Yeah, the next class is going to be doing business in Mexico, and that's going to be on the 13th of June, which is almost a month from now. Same time, same station. So we hope that you will take time to attend that webinar and gain some insight. You know, obviously, doing business in Mexico and in Canada has a lot of advantages. Obviously, part of USMCA. things are much more transparent and flat, and so it's not much different than doing business in another state. So in any case, if you guys are interested in doing business in Mexico, we're going to have some really good people answering questions and giving us tremendous insight into doing business in Mexico, and obviously some of the things that you need to know before doing business in Mexico. So with that, I think we will call it a webinar. David, thanks again. Here's folks, you might take a picture. Miss Heidi, can you throw that back up if you please would? Yeah. You might take a picture of this slide so that you can contact whoever you think is the appropriate person, based on whatever question you have. And with that, we'll call a webinar, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you again.
Thank you,
David,
everyone.
thank you. Okay, bye-bye.